chat a little bit with Henry if he's able to about his new role because I think he's actually doing some stuff that's pretty interesting that will definitely impact you guys. And maybe we'll just go ahead and get that out of the way first. And then we'll get into the other piece of it, which people may or may not be interested in. I don't know. We'll see what ends up happening. It's primarily about contract breaking and data loss. So I guess you probably are interested in it, but we'll find out. Um, so last week, Henry explained that he is moving into more of a product marketing and evangelism role, which is going to be about providing information about technical architecture, about case studying, use cases, about how essentially the various pieces interconnect between the distributed data center and the XNS storage network. He's got a really broad portfolio of things that he's going to be working on, all the way from tutorialization to just simple evangelism to uh, providing technical details and architecture and journaling. But one of the things that's always been kind of near and dear to my heart, I tried to get our community managers to do this work, and they actually did a pretty good job of, a quick second. They did a pretty good job of onboarding and bringing a bunch of information together, but we never really did anything with it. We didn't get it online, or we didn't really, do any kind of social media work behind it or anything like that. But what this was a competitive matrix or a competitive breakdown on where we stack up. I think too often the only metric we ever really run on is the metric of coin price. And we've never stacked up in coin price to anybody. even really crummy things that don't even have any use case, we don't really stack up very well against in terms of coin price, primarily because we just haven't done any of the crypto marketing stuff or crypto related sort of pump and dump type stuff. But from a perspective of taking the storage projects that are out there, early on we kind of looked at it, and if you go to CMC or you go to CoinGecko and you pull up the storage category, you're going to find that there's like 20 or 30 projects under the storage category. And it's pretty quickly easy to weed out 5 to 10 of them as not really being in the storage space. They're doing stuff that's related, but it's not really accurate to call it distributed storage. And then there's, projects that are attempting to do storage in a way, but for something really specific that isn't really the same thing that we're doing. So like Arweave is a pretty good example. You can argue whether what they're doing has any validity or whether it actually works or will hold up over years like they think it will. That's an academic argument, and it is what it is. At the end of the day, $10,000 to store a terabyte of stuff doesn't really make a lot of sense to most anybody. I mean, there might be a place where storing really specific documents that you believe need to be stored for the lifetime, and you're convinced that the thing works, maybe. I mean, they did get some onboarded stuff. NFTs are going to be the thing that really makes sense there if that ultimately works out for both of those two pieces. But it's not really anything related to us. It doesn't have anything to do with what we're going after. S3 compatible storage for business cloud or even personal cloud is something quite different. It requires petabytes and exabytes and zettabytes of capacities, not, gigabytes and terabytes. So you weed those kinds of people out of the equation. And really what you end up coming down to is you end up coming down to having 2 or 3 projects really when it's all said and done. You might be able to say there's like 5 or 6. You can say like Lambda, for instance, is a project that fits here. It's a China project. I don't know if they're ever going to turn into anything or if they were just a coin grab. I don't know. Maybe they are. Maybe it's a thing. But China is really interesting because you can't really stand up a provider in China. If you do, Well, you, you now are going to have to face the whole, cryptocurrency mining thing. So if you somehow get found out that you're running a miner for these crypto things, you're going to probably have to face some music. You can't really sell or buy the coins that you yield directly inside WeChat like most everybody did the cryptos over there. Um, so you have to go through the great firewall out to South Exchange or whatever. Um, but there's always been this provision in their law that the ISP is actually liable for whatever's posted. So the minute you start standing up storage nodes in China, and the minute stuff starts showing up on those nodes that goes against the whatever the government, determines is good and not good, um, the ISP is going to shut you right down because the ISP is liable for it. They can go to prison for it over there, which is different from over here in the West. So Lambda probably has some issues that they're going to have to overcome that I don't know that they're good. Oddly, you can probably distinguish Filecoin as being in that boat since a lot of their actual nodes that host storage actually are based in China. So that's a real liability, I think, that could turn into something. Sure, it may turn out that having a bunch of China nodes is valuable, but at this point, we don't know. So, we kind of broke it down into really, when it was all said and done, into, sort of us, Filecoin to a degree, just because they're so big and they have so much, financial backing, storage, and um, because it's kind of where we all sort of came from. Originally, we lumped in Sia and now Skynet. But even there, it doesn't really make sense. And Henry and I have had this discussion, and we sort of concluded that Sia and Skynet don't really belong in there because they don't actually work to do this kind of business. To do this kind of business, you have to bolt on a layer two, and the piece that's currently there that does S3 compatible work on that upper layer is fully centralized, right? I mean, it's like you have to store your stuff on their servers and then they feed it off to the distributed network. So a business that's going to trust somebody to do that, I mean, the only reason you would really do it is for the cost savings, and their price is identical to Wasabi. So why wouldn't you go with one that's a little more trusty than? And so I don't even think they make sense. To be honest with you, it's really come down to three: us, Filecoin, and Storage. And Filecoin is kind of all over the map, right, in terms of what they're providing. And I don't think that's going to change. I think it's going to get more and more obtuse and more, nebulous and more all over the place. And maybe they will have some good S3 business type stuff. But at the end of the day, I think it's really going to come down to us and storage. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to turn it over to Henry, and I don't expect him to really get into too much detail right now. But what I want him to do is just kind of talk a little bit about the framing that he's looking at, some of the interesting things that he's discovered so far in his research, what he's hoping to put together, kind of how he sort of viewed Filecoin and Sia and some of these as he was looking at them, and just kind of providing a little bit of insights into this research piece that we're going to put together, because right now we don't even know how we're going to distribute this. It's not necessarily a great thing for us as a project to put out a piece that says, no, 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 you guys suck and we don't, or something like that. But I think there's some benefit in us putting out, some kind of competitive info. But this format right here is a pretty good one to kind of kick it off. So why don't you explain yourself, Henry?
Yeah, thanks for the intro, Ken. So the content that I've written thus far is kind of in the format of kind of a loose blog post, but there are some kind of notes and research pieces in there as well. I think we could I think if I see a way to do it that achieves what we want, this could potentially be some video content as well. Because I know that there's lots of people out there that kind of like consuming content and receiving information that way, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. So if that's something that we wind up doing, I think that could be a good opportunity. But yeah, so this piece that I'm working on, I'll kind of, before we dive into some of the specifics of findings, I'll just kind of dive into what some of the angles that I'm kind of coming at from. As Ken kind of touched on at the end there, with like, this isn't just state sponsored hit piece that I'm writing here. Like this, uh, although there are a number of things that I could and sometimes was tempted to uh, write somewhat acidly or caustically for. I think ultimately I do need to give a fair explanation, and take a fair look at all these projects, consider what their strengths are, even if they're things that I don't necessarily value. So if Arweave has somehow won lots of market share in the NFT space, even though I'm not overly interested in NFTs, and I don't think that's what we're doing here, I still uh, can't really tease them too much for that, because that is something that does have a place in the market. I don't think you could argue that it isn't a thing. I mean, it is a thing. Whether you value that or not is up to you. Uh, so I think some of the tone of the writing uh, is kind of interesting, and I think it's going to wind up being striking the balance between uh, kind of no nonsense and just kind of cutting to what the real story is. So can you actually use these networks for like realistic applications? Can you use other like third party applications, or do you have to use specifically the client that comes for the network? Like, how usable is it really? So just kind of cutting straight to the chase there is definitely something that I want to incorporate, because that's what I felt has kind of been missing from a lot of the other articles that do exist comparing these networks. But at the same time, so kind of no nonsense on one side, but on the other side, bringing in, but so these networks do have strengths. There are sometimes very niche things that they are good at, and that we can't do, largely because we're not as well suited to doing, and that's largely because we don't want to, and that's not a direction that we feel our network uh, is like it's important to go. But at the same time, being fair and professional, and understanding that ultimately this article might reach some people from those communities, and I want them to feel that it's been a fair evaluation of their network. Potentially, some of them will even learn some things about their own networks from here. So, diving into some of the specific stuff, uh, yeah, let's start with Filecoin. So, this is an interesting project, and I think it's in some ways, if I had to kind of give it a one sentence summary, um, Filecoin is probably the most crypto of all the storage networks, for all the good and the bad that's kind of implied with that. So it did one of the most crypto things ever, and raised like $257 million in an ICO in 2017. So it has this huge war chest that it still seems to be working off of. It has a very fancy website, and it throws around a lot of huge numbers and decentralization here and there. And uh, it does look pretty shiny, and it is, as referenced earlier, it is kind of the top of the storage networks on all of the different comparisons that you'll look at in terms of. It seems to be the highest market cap. It somehow, well, I'll get into a bit later, uh, always has the most storage capacity and the most storage usage. It seems to just kind of be uh, way up there, ahead of everyone else, but you never really hear about people actually using it. Uh, if you kind of dive into it, it seems a little, or like maybe you should be a little skeptical of like, is this thing actually, does it actually do what it claims it can do? Because I don't see anyone using it, but it, sure, those are big numbers, and it does look shiny. But uh, so diving into some of the details, one of the things that was immediately kind of struck me as kind of way out there is how they've incorporated the consensus, like block mining, into storage providing. So on their network, whenever you are providing storage, you are also active in the block mining process. Uh, So that's something that isn't quite the case on most of the other networks. For the most part, if you are providing storage, you're just doing that. And you're not also, and you're earning income through providing that storage, but you're not also mining blocks, because typically mining blocks requires a huge amount of compute, and that is a very different requirement to being a storage provider. But they've kind of mixed those two. So to even get started on Filecoin, you need like a $7,500 to $10,000 computer. I'm talking like 3 or 4 RTX 3090s, like 256 to half a terabyte gigs of RAM, just like insane specs. It's really I was shocked at how high of a requirements you needed to even earn anything. And really, that doesn't really seem to make sense to me, because why should you have all that if you just are, at the end of the day, the value that is there is that you're providing hard drive space over the internet. I mean, that seems a little unnecessary. But because those huge requirements are involved, and they mix in the storage providing and the block mining process, I think that that's how they're reaching those huge capacity figures and the huge usage figures. Is just because they're kind of mixing in these two processes that on every other network are kind of separate, but they're kind of mixing them together in this weird way. And it's also worth mentioning that most people who are ultimately mining on Filecoin, they're not actually accepting data. So I think that that's kind of highly misleading, and that isn't very transparently represented anywhere either. So they have all this capacity, but very little of it is usable. And it's almost all in China, which is considering, well, in our sphere anyway, we're mostly Western-based cloud service users. So sending all your data unencrypted to China is perhaps not something that your CTO would be very happy with. Then getting into just kind of touching on some of the technicals as well, there's no like default redundancy or erasure coding or anything like that most of the other networks realize are kind of, or they understand that those are necessary in order to ensure availability long term. And I mean, you can also lean on some of that for performance as well, like what we did. But none of that is a thing on Filecoin. They don't seem particularly interested in involving that directly. So Filecoin's just kind of a weird one where they're huge, but I can't really explain why. And they don't really seem useful for anything that actually people pay money for in the real life, or in the real world. I did see a thread last week that did actually pique my interest a bit. Someone did make the case that for a very specific or a very narrow target, which was if you have large single data sets that you need to be available for long periods of time, like if you have some kind of academic data set that you want to be available on the internet forever, then apparently in that very narrow use case, Filecoin is competitive. But I haven't really dove into that too much either, because I don't know that much about the needs of large single academic data sets. And so that's something that I'm still going to want to dive into. But that was really the only thing that I could even see from Filecoin's community as them saying that they're good at. So anyway, that's probably enough about Filecoin for now. I think ultimately the conclusion that we're going to kind of draw in this article is that Filecoin is kind of fake. They're not a real storage network. Their numbers are like kind of pumped up by involving this mining process. Almost all of the people who are involved in the network are only interested in mining these blocks and not actually in accepting any data. And even if they do accept data, there's very little penalty for just dropping that data once it becomes not profitable enough for you to keep it anymore. So Filecoin is, yeah, like kind of pumped up numbers, very convoluted technicals, and how things actually work are just kind of curious and don't really line up with how most other storage networks approach things. But they still somehow have those huge numbers, huge market cap, huge capacity, huge claimed capacity anyway, although there's very little transparency into if that's meaningful or not. So I think we just kind of have to draw the conclusion that Filecoin is not a real storage network. And I don't really consider them a serious competitor to any of the others because they haven't really proven their spot yet, which is curious as they are they are the top of the list anytime you look. So that kind of does irk me that they have that spot and don't really have anything to back that up. But anyway, so we can go a bit into Arweave as well. I do have some sections on that in the article since they are ultimately kind of doing their own thing. I don't know if or how much will ultimately wind up in the comparison because at the end of the day, you can't store your like VM backups on Arweave. It's just not a thing. They do have a pretty narrow use case that they do seem okay at. They have 80 terabytes of NFTs or something, but at the end of the day, 80 terabytes is like on any other cloud network, pretty tiny. So you can't store any reasonably sized data sets on Arweave. And their technicals are a little concerning as well. And I do think long term, their structure will start to show some stress cracks. So that does kind of lead us to storage. I do think storage is ultimately going to be our main competitor. They're really the only one I've seen that takes a similar approach to us in that if you want to work with businesses and enterprise, you need to make it as frictionless for them to move over to your cloud service. So that means adopting that S3 protocol that we talk about so much. So that S3 protocol is kind of an open protocol. Anyone can develop on top of it. Some people in the crypto sphere kind of cast it away because, it's Amazon developed and Amazon is, one of the most egregious examples of centralization. But at the end of the day, if everyone's using S3 and it's kind of an open protocol and there's third-party applications out there that use it, I mean, thousands of them, then you'd be kind of crazy not to adopt that standard and instead expect everyone else to switch over to your proprietary protocol, because you're going to have a very hard time winning over business if they have to completely change all the different applications that they already have using. That is an unrealistic expectation. So making it as simple for businesses to move over as possible. Storage does seem to get that as well. So they do have S3 support. If you're actually paying money to store on storage, you can pay with real dollars and you don't have to set up and manage your own crypto wallet. So that's something else that we kind of see eye to eye on that being an important thing for real world adoption. So I do see them as ideologically the most similar out there. And I do certainly respect or have respect for what they've achieved, because having done a lot of that ourselves, it's not easy. But at the end of the day, storage is on their V3 network. So it did take them a couple tries to get there. Their V1 and V2 network didn't quite look like what it does today. But I'll give them credit that at the end of the day, they did come to the same conclusions we came to, or some of them anyway. But storage does have some pretty important differences to what we're doing. So one of the most notable ones probably is that they don't have their own blockchain. They're a token on top of Ethereum. They don't have their own consensus protocol. The only real explanation that I could find from their white paper is that they say that all of the different consensus protocols that exist today require too much coordination or something, too much communication between the nodes, and that they weren't satisfied with that. So they're just ignoring the problem entirely until there is a better solution out there. And I think that's kind of bogus. I don't know how they could honestly come to that conclusion, because I mean, sure, there are lots of complaints and imperfections you can find in a lot of today's consensus and block mining protocols, but at the end of the day, I don't think their gripe of they require too much coordination and communication, I don't think that really makes a lot of sense on a cloud storage network, because it's kind of implied that there is going to be a lot of coordination and communication between the nodes, because that's kind of the whole point. So that doesn't really make sense to me, and it does make them a bit weaker in terms of how fundamentally sound they are and resistance to potential bad actors or errors or faults in the system. They're not quite as resilient as a lot of other networks that would have their own layer for that are, including us, because we do operate our own consensus layer. They're also, by building on top of someone else's layer, in this case Ethereum, they're also subject to all the different like politics and congestion that go on that network. So if you're in the crypto space, you probably know of some of the congestion that happens on the Ethereum network, particularly if the market is particularly hot. So if people are buying or selling, or they're interacting lots with those smart contracts for doing swaps or minting NFTs or whatever. And at the end of the day, storage is competing with all of those things for room in Ethereum blocks. So that means they're not really in control of all the aspects of their own system. And at the end of the day, storage providers are affected if network fees are particularly high, and they often are on Ethereum. So that's no fun. There's also some differences with storage. So that's kind of under the hood. And if you're into blockchain or you're a bit blockchain savvy and you understand most of what that kind of meant, and you understand how I came to that conclusion, that's awesome. You're doing great. But if at the end of the day you only really care about actually using it, that's fine too. And storage does have S3 capable application. They do push their hosted one pretty hard. So that is kind of a central gateway that you don't host on your own computer. They host it for you. They do push that pretty hard, but you can set up your own if you want. But one of the biggest differences between that application and our Relayer app is that they don't really expose a lot of the lower level controls to you. And that was kind of disappointing to me, because I think one of the huge strengths of the Relayer app, and I hope I'm not biased in saying this as someone who has spent a lot of time in the Relayer app, but truly, there's an immense amount of power that can be harnessed through understanding and setting up like the different erasure code shards and ratios, the different distributions that you're sending out to providers. That is where you can really get a lot of the power that comes from a distributed network like this. And they don't expose any of that to you in the storage app. So there's no way to set erasure codes. You're just stuck using the one that they decided a couple of years ago was the one for their network, which also I looked into. They didn't provide any explanation how they came to those numbers either. So that's curious to me. But they don't give you those same controls, so you're not able to tune to your specific needs or get the most out of using a distributed network. There are also a couple of inefficiencies, like on their network, when you start to upload a file, it actually uploads more copies or it uploads more shards than are required, and then it like stops uploading those ones after it hits a certain number, and that just kind of seems inefficient to me. And it does the same with downloads. It downloads more shards than it needs to, and then once it gets the amount that are required, then it stops downloading those other ones. As far as I could tell, they're doing that because they aren't being that picky about who they're giving shards to, and they don't want you to ever be stuck on uploading or downloading to or from a really slow provider. So if you are only downloading the exact number of shards that you need, and one of those providers is kind of slow, then you might be waiting a while. So their way of getting around that is just by downloading more than you need. So you're never stuck on waiting for one or two really slow ones. But you could totally avoid that problem in the first place if you just didn't hand those shards to slow providers. If you're more picky with provider selection, then you can avoid that problem entirely. And I don't really see a way that storage is going to approach that, solving that in an efficient way. But that's something that I think we handle pretty well, and is going to be a huge strength for our distributed network. So that's kind of the gist, or at least a lot of the material and research that we've kind of come to for some of these different projects. I think the conclusion that is going to be kind of driven home is that of all the networks that are looked at, if you're interested in, if you use existing cloud services, really the only ones that you ought to consider is exanet services and storage, and I think storage is fine, but I think at the end of the day, our service is better. I think we're faster. We give you access to a lot more of the good stuff. Uh, I think they're good, they're fine, but we're just better, and I could tell you why in 2 sentences, or I could tell you why in 200 sentences. But I think that's the conclusion that people are going to come to. Well, there's more people in the audience now than when I started speaking, so I'll take that as a good sign.
I was trying to think of how I was going to respond to that, because that was all I can say is Leroy Jenkins. I mean, that was a strong presentation, folks. And I think when people really do understand this across the board, almost none of this shit in crypto is real, right? It's like they've designed stuff that they know is never going to stand the real test of true product use. And so they all just sort of gone a different direction. Look, our relayer isn't working perfectly in that, it's just so lead pipe simple for anybody to stand up on some Dell in their living room and then start serving storage for customers. But by the same token, it's also not rocket science to set one up. And if you set up a relayer on a strong enough and decent enough connection, and with the right understanding of how the applications that work on top of it, we actually compare very favorably to all the majors. I mean, this is going to be a truly real thing. And it won't be long before we just stop even considering ourselves a crypto and just start considering ourselves a storage company, and let the chips fall where they may. The whole Filecoin thing, they don't really care. They actually would prefer that we went into a 4-year bear market right now. They got plenty of money. They got plenty of developers to just kind of just sit and do research work. They're like an academic institution, right? So they don't care. Couple of the other ones, Arweave, I'm not sure. They got Silicon Valley money behind them. They got a huge valuation. So I think probably the same thing. We're the only ones who have essentially said we didn't take really any money from any big timers, and we're willing to go out and live and die in the market. And yeah, there's been some discussion about people that don't really think we're going to succeed at that. And I'm willing to sort of take that challenge, but I don't know how you can look at what we've done and look at what they've done and not say, man, this project is cool and this project is really doing it right, and they're doing a good job at it and going forward. Well, I guess one of the ways you could say that you don't agree with that is posting your Grafana link and your chart that shows that you had 300 gigs of data last week, and then you have a vertical drop and you have 0 gigs of data this week. And yeah, that's frustrating, and we get that it's frustrating. Before I launch into this little soliloquy or discussion or whatever you want to call it about what's going on with our contracting, I do want to remind everybody that there's a petabyte of data on the network that essentially doesn't really need to be there. It got uploaded under testing regimes, whether it was like trying to understand about upload performance, download performance, whether we could store X amount of data on any given provider, whether we could put millions of tiny files packed into a single sector, whether we could do, a certain kind of erasure coding ratio. There's all kinds of different things that we've tested over the last year and a half as that petabyte has gotten uploaded. But there's really no reason why it's still there, right? I mean, once we uploaded it, we probably should have let it expire and just fall off, but we didn't. And I think it's really important you understand that we didn't, and we're not going to, right? Yeah, right now there's some that's slipping off, but it's slipping off in a way that's helping us to understand and make our contracting more hardened, and more robust and resistant to various vectors. And ultimately, at the end of the day, our intention, as I've described multiple AMAs, is to onboard more testing data because we have a lot more testing to do. And it's not going to end just because we start onboarding real customers. We're going to continue to do testing. And our goal right now is that that testing data doesn't have a predetermined end date. I'm not saying it's going to stay there forever, but it won't have to, right? Once we start onboarding real customer data, at some point we will make a decision. Okay, now we have enough, onboarding coming with real world data that we can start to let some of this test data drop off, and people aren't going to notice too big of a difference, and it'll be fine. Yet I get that we're in that place right now where optics are really important, and you were earning, $1.80 last week, and then you got this data drop, and this week you're going to earn, 40 cents. I get it that it feels bad, man. But same time, you're not really earning anything right now. I mean, you need to kind of understand this thing that I've been trying to sort of position, and I've held off on posting it. I'm going to post it here soon, but I went through it a little bit last week. But it's that thing of, look, what you expect to have happen on your provider is month over month over month over month, you expect to start onboarding amounts of data. And what you would expect, and I hope to see happen, and it won't be perfect and it won't be a perfectly smooth chart, but it'll be a chart that will look something like this. Month over month in year one, you'll probably start off with just a few gigabytes, and then, a few more next month, and maybe it'll increase month over month. And by the time you get to month 12 of your participation here, what you're kind of expecting is that you're getting, a few hundred gigabytes per month of storage. And then as you get into year two, perhaps it gets up into you're getting regular 2 or 3 or 400 gigabyte months. And then as you get to the end of year two, maybe you have a month where you get 500 gigabytes. And then it just kind of does that in this smooth growth to where ultimately by the time you get to year 3, 4, and 5, now you're starting to onboard some real data and you're getting some months that are really kicking it up. And then by the time you're in there fully where your node is, pretty well populated, you're pulling down real money every single month. Because why? Because typically what happens on this archival and cloud-based storage that we're offering, object-based storage, people set up accounts to upload storage and then it just stays there. It doesn't ever go away, right? They don't move it. The only reason they would move it is if they moved from our service to some other service. They still need to preserve it in the cloud. So it's a long-term ongoing subscription revenue. So you expect that it's going to start slow, increase, and then over time, it's just going to get more and more and more and more valuable to you. So in this first period that it's not taking off yet, and it's all testing data, and then you get some drops to go along with your ups. I think you just have to say, look, that's just where we are. They're continuing to work on stuff. So I'll tell you what's going on behind the scenes right now. But the deal is you need to sort of make sure you're tailoring your expectations correctly for this testing data. Once we get into production data, then it'll be whatever. And by the way, production data ain't going to be just what I said. It ain't going to be this nice, smooth, curve that starts out flat and hockey sticks. It might do that, but it might also go away where, you're going and you have a month where you get 200 gigabytes, and then all of a sudden the next month we get like some crazy onboarding and you get a terabyte, right, out of the blue on that month, or you get even more than that, right? It could definitely do that depending on what kinds of customers we onboard and how many storage nodes actually exist on the network when we do it. But the long tail look of the chart should look like a slow, but then more rapidly growing growth curve when it's smoothed out. So like if you take a bigger moving average. Anyway, what's going on behind the scenes right now is this. So we were As you recall, we were coming into January hoping to do sort of a launch, a soft launch of sorts, but then we kind of got like really messed up. And we got messed up in a good way, by the way. What happened was all of you people showed up and 11,000 of your friends, and ultimately you crashed the network, you crashed everything you could. And ultimately we were exposed for having a little less back end than we probably needed to have. And so we had to go back to work and do some infrastructure design and work and harden everything and get it all, sort of screwed around to the way it needed to be. And one of those things that we had to do in that process was, so let's just talk a little bit about contracting, because I think this is an area that may be confusing to people, but ultimately it's not. I mean, it's really a wide open, very transparent sort of situation. So when we talk about other projects having centralization, so when we talk about storage, one of the reasons you can't change those parameters is because you don't own the satellites. Storage, the corporation owns the satellites, right? And one of the things where we are very proud of our work is the relayer, because essentially what the relayer is, it's putting a satellite in your facility. But it's not just that, it's putting a satellite in your facility and then also giving you the granular control to drive our network any way you see fit. If you want to run an erasure code set that's 100, 400, you can, right? If you want to dial it down to just 20 super performant providers that are going to be here and work really fast, you can. You can do all kinds of things. And we're going to extrapolate and abstract that out to the cache, where the cache is going to be super powerful. So you own those satellites. So that's the core of our decentralization. That distributed renter is the core of our decentralization. And that's what gives us the 0.5 in Web 2.5 right now, right? If we say that, somebody else is trying to be Web 3.0 because they're letting anybody do anything permissionlessly, and we say that AWS and GCP and Azure and Wasabi, Backblaze, blah, 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 are all Web 2, then we go back to our evolution then revolution concept, and we end up in this place where we sort of have said that we think we are Web 2.5. People pay us in fiat, but they have a distributed node which allows them to always control their data. We don't control their data ever, right? We don't ever have possession of their data. We can't turn it over to the NSA. We can't do anything with it. We don't ever see it. It goes directly from them to the distributed network in shards. So that's like decentralized way beyond what anybody else is doing right now. But we also have on top of that our contractor. And the contractor is that device that sells the contracts between us and the storage network. And the reason why it's between us and the storage network and not between the clients in the storage network is because we are selling the storage to the clients for fiat. They're paying us with credit cards and whatever. We then custody and provision and purchase and do all the work with the cryptocurrency that goes on underneath the hood, so that ultimately that data that gets uploaded by that customer is paid for. So right out of the gate, you know right for a fact that we have a significant centralization to our project. The contracting is centralized, okay? But here's the story with contracting being centralized. Yes, it is. And yes, it does provide us a lot of benefits and advantages that will allow us to onboard real world people. There are companies right now in the real world who, if you called and had a sales call and you were right in the middle of the call and somehow it slipped out that cryptocurrency was going to be at the core of this and they would have to buy it and custody, they just hang up the phone on you, right? The whole crypto space right now is primarily being thought of as scammers and thieves. People in the business maybe don't quite get that that's the general consensus, but it is. And at the end of it right now, us being able to say, well, look, crypto has its place, but it needs to be harnessed and used correctly. It needs to not be turned into some, crazy oasis, mirage that, provides you with pipe dream APY so that you come aping into the coin thinking that you're going to get rich in 3 weeks. Well, we all know what that looks like when you come here and you act like that in our Discord, right? We've seen that over and over and over again. It isn't what we're doing here, and that's part of it. But at the same time, it's also going to be very easy for us to transition to Web3 when the world is accepting of it, right? It will be easy for us to push the contractor out to the individual relayer instances. And the way we'll get paid at that point will be off the SPFs, right? So we have a plan to do the whole enchilada. But right now, we believe that a centralized contractor is far more preferable than anything else. Okay, so the problem is that creates some pretty good vectors for people to attack us, because if you tear the contractor down, you've essentially shut the project down, right? So the first thing that we had to do is we had to change our original configuration and harden it and build it around a big clustered service and then put it behind some CDN type stuff and really robust out the server configuration that we had for contracting. Well, we did that. And at the same time that we did that, we also completed one more piece of the white paper, which was this thing called deferred contract updates, which was that tokening thing, which, remember back in the beginning, we talked about contracting was an asynchronous process that one storage node could belly up to the bar and do contracting, but then it would have to essentially stop and wait. And then one relayer could come in, then a second relayer, then a third, then a fourth. That was sequential, or it was like in sequence. And that obviously was not going to work at scale. So we needed to do it in a way that it was all, we had, very vast parallelism built into the process. Well, we did that through this tokening thing. Tokening is this deal where your node essentially puts up a really tiny pennies amount of storage to just hold stuff in a queue while somebody's waiting to work on a contract with you. Okay. And deferred contracts and prepaid downloads are the two parts of that. And they seem to work really well when we first rolled out that server configuration. So everything was on track and we were in pretty good shape, and we thought things were, really good. The next piece of the server array that we needed to do to ensure that we had a robust and very scalable, because we were really now looking at exponential numbers, is that we knew that we were going to have to put Kafka into this thing. Kafka is a big data streaming architecture, which allows for, big giant fire hosing of data. And so we put that together and it's working good. That also is running in its own cluster, very hardened, very performant, very resistant. But at the same time, we worked through all of the implementation and getting that set up and working good. But there got to be this little nagging thing that our lead developer saw. And in the beginning, it wasn't really hurting anything. So it didn't pull any fire drill. And so what happened was he started noticing that a number of providers weren't really working, that a bunch of your instances were sort of like reporting back that they couldn't accept storage, or that they weren't renewing contracts correctly, or that they, and the problem is that there's a manifold of reasons why that could be. So like, we might get a log entry back that says, storage price too high. So maybe you accidentally set the storage price above guidelines or whatever and forgot to put it back down, or maybe the collateral price was too low or something along those lines, or maybe some other setting that you built into your provider was just not within bounds and ultimately caused the contractor to say, no, I'm not forming or renewing another contract with this provider. We also set a number of things that would allow the contractor to retry, right? And it's not like we just look at you once, and if you don't pass the test, we then throw you into a ban list and say you're not going to get anything going forward. We try multiple times, and then ultimately, if we get multiple failures, then we move you off and segment you into a different place where we highlight it. Well, The problem is that as time went by, our lead developer finally raised his hand and he said, "Hey, I'm getting really nervous about this because these numbers are growing." And I said, "Well, what does that mean?" He said, "Well, like 75% of the network has problems." And we knew that that couldn't be right. We knew that 75% of the network was not having real quote unquote problems. So that's where we were, and we were starting to sort of say, okay, well, what do we got to do to set up the test to sort of understand this? Let's go ahead and work through it. And we were in the process of, understanding it, reading through a just voluminous amount of logs, really sort of trying to do some test netting and understanding. And then all of a sudden, something happened that really kind of pushed us into a hole. Um, we had gotten a little aggressive in importing some code because one of the things that we knew were going to want to do is to have a good solid garbage collection that would allow us to remove data once it was clear that the customer no longer had it on the network. Because right now, without that software running, when you upload data to the network, as long as the contract keeps renewing with that provider, we have to keep paying for that storage. So if we sell storage to some, tractor company in Des Moines, Iowa, and then, 6 months from now they go out of business and say, well, we don't need the storage anymore. So thank you. Goodbye. We don't care what you do with the data on the network. We're just not going to pay for it anymore. We're done. We would have to keep paying. And so obviously garbage collection and deletion is necessary before this thing can move forward. So we implemented that and we rolled it over. But because we have so many things going on, we really didn't do a great job of validating and test netting it. And we did some, but just not enough to really understand. And so then the very first instance appeared and we got a bunch of people that lost data. And that's the worst thing that can happen to us, right? So, that sent the fire bells going off inside at our project. We freaked out. People got yelled at. I mean, I'm sorry. I hate to say that, but yeah, I mean, that's one that's going to cause me to yell at people. I I'm pretty good at reining a lot of that sort of stuff in, but look, data loss, protecting data is what we're charged with. That is our thing. So if that goes against, we're not doing what we set out to do. And that's, we're not going to be here. We're going to go away. So we had a lot of really internal sort of, all hands type sessions. And we realized we need to do some stuff. That's when 163 got rolled out. And we said, okay, well, we'll just remove that code. And ultimately, let's go back to what we were doing. And then when we're ready, we'll go ahead and do the test netting on that and so forth. But after removing the code, we still saw some more data losses. So we're like scratching our heads. Well, what the hell? And we went back in and realized there were still some scraps of the code left in there. There were still some places where the code was still doing some stuff. And so we had to roll out another version of SPD, and we did. And then still had some data loss, right? And so now we're realizing that, hey, this is a real issue. We've got to tackle this. Well, this is where it gets a little bit thorny because my lead developer, the guy who's, essentially been doing all of the major coding on the contractor itself, the guy who knows the contractor inside and out, had a vacation on the books for the summer. And it's the kind of vacation that you can't really postpone or push off because, he'd already purchased this package. And, if he didn't go, he was going to essentially be out it. And I just didn't really feel good about telling him, no, you can't go. And so, at that point, we just said, well, we'll keep working on the testing behind the scenes and work on it. But we're right now in that phase. He's gone off now on vacation, and internally our devs are working on the contractor to try and understand and solve this issue. I think we found some good actionable stuff to tell us this is what's going on. But the problem is that because we don't have the lead engineer here right now, I also don't feel great in just sort of saying, yep, that was it. Let's go ahead and, merge that in and go ahead and release it and call it a day and say it's good. We've been running it on a test net. We're going to keep running it on a test net. We're going to make some changes to the production network in order to preserve data. But I think it's going to be about another week before we actually have finality to this episode. And it's okay, because in the end, where we are is a really interesting place. And I'm going to go through that really quickly here. So, yeah, I mean, might possibly see 1 or 2 or 10 or 12 or whatever gigabytes get dumped off of any individual provider over the next couple of days. We know if somebody is not been updated, we know if they don't have a license, that there's a good chance they're going to lose some data. But even some of the good legitimate people are going to maybe perhaps lose some of this testing data. I hope not, but maybe. At the minimum, though, we're getting really good logging from those, and we're able to go ahead and finalize this testing and forensic work that we're doing to ultimately, patch, repair, and complete this process. And where are we as a project, and why, is it okay if this is the situation? Well, look, January 18th was a thing. It didn't happen, primarily because the community just grew like crazy and it just put us behind the thing. But it was good that it didn't happen, right? If we had launched on January 18th with the infrastructure we had underneath us, we were doomed, right? We were going to fall apart sooner or later. Better to fall apart without protecting real customer data, right? Because if we do that, then at least we can recover. But if we have real customers, it's not going to work. So then, what was the next one? The next one was NAB, right? And we were out there and we did everything we could to launch. And I thought we had a spectacular launch, and the optics of it were awesome. The ability to meet a bunch of you guys was just fantastic. Apologize, I was a little burnt out by the time we got there, but at the same time, I think it was just a wonderful experience, and I think we did a great job. But when we got back to the facility and we sort of started looking at what we had finished, we had to look in the mirror and recognize, well, we're close, but we're not quite there yet. The relayer still needs some help. We have to make it easy to install. We have to do some things. So we did. We set about doing that. And the last several weeks, if you've been watching the relayer channel, you know that the relayer works. People are setting it up and running with it. Yeah, they've fallen a few holes along the way, and we've gone back and done a version, roll on it. But it's not that hard to set up and use. And actually, it's working pretty good. And the people that are experimenting with it are having a pretty good time. So we're there and we're ready to go, except for this thing behind the scenes. Well, the other side is that we don't have a lot of marketing money, as I said. So it's not like I can just turn on a switch and all of a sudden onboard 500 petabytes of data. I can't. I don't have that demand generation out there yet. And I don't have any way to go out there right now and to generate that demand by doing a bunch of traditional, cloud marketing, advertising, keyword marketing, affiliate marketing, any of that sort of stuff. I just don't have the ability to do it that way just yet. But what I do have is exactly what we said we were going to do, which is focusing first on partners. And so what I've been telling partners today is, and I've been telling them actually this for a couple of weeks, is that we were prepared for this. We know where we're at. We are ready to go. And so what we need now is for our partners to go out there and to get that data that they have been prepping for this time and start bringing those customers back in. And we will sit down and we will formulate custom deals for these people. In other words, our current headline price right now is $10 a terabyte. But for customers coming and saying, well, it's brand new network. I mean, do I trust you guys? Seems like that ought to deduct a couple of bucks. And oh, by the way, I can get Wasabi over here for this. That ought to deduct a couple of bucks. And, how do you help me out here? And I can do it. We can do that kind of work right now where we look to a partner and say, well, look, if they're willing to come aboard for 6 months and commit to X amount of petabytes, we'll give them this price and it'll last over this period of time. And what'll end up happening is the project will compensate that out of this pretty voluminous wallet that we've built by buying coins on the exchange over the last year and a half. And you're going to say, well, what does that mean? You've been pumping the coin? And I'm going to tell you, no, we haven't. We've been buying the coin cheap. We don't want to pay top dollar for the coin. We just want to get a huge wallet built up so that we can have our expenses well covered over the next 2, 3, and 4 quarters going forward. What does that mean? That means if we onboard 50 petabytes over the next, say, 2 quarters, right? We don't have any costs. They're already all covered, right? I don't have to pay actual cash to go buy coins on the market and put them into the contracts. I've got a huge wallet that I've been building for a year and a half that's already set up to handle that. Okay. So somebody out there is going, boo, I bought this coin because I thought that you guys were going to be pumping the coin price up and making it go like that. Well, look, if we were going to do that, we might as well hang a sign on our back that says Gary Gensler, SEC, come and have lunch with us. You know, because that's exactly the kind of shit that we're not about. We're about doing it right, and doing it right is we don't want to pay top dollar, we want to pay bottom dollar. But same token, we pulled a ton of coins out of the market, right? We pulled a ton of coins out of the book. And so by the time that people really do start to understand and see the network going up, the use going up, and seeing the network getting filled up with real data and seeing revenues actually coming onto your providers and seeing you guys starting to high five because you're now looking at a terabyte of data or whatever, then they're going to go out and say, hey, we better buy this coin up because it might go up or something like that. And they're going to realize there's no coins on the exchange. Where are all the coins? The coins are sacked away in big wallets. They're gone. They're just not there. And there's just no way to get them. So I don't know what's going to happen. I'm not trying to talk you into pumping the coin because at the end of the day, I don't know when and where that's going to happen. And it don't matter to me because I bought all our coins cheap. And I'm going to keep buying them cheap as long as we can because I can give those partners those deals and onboard a ton of data. By the end of this year, I expect we're going to have a lot of petabytes on our network. And I expect it because we're going to subsidize those deals. We are going to help our partners stuff their pockets full of money. And that will make a situation where customer happy, partner happy, Faust happy. And Faust is never happy. So, you know, you have to recognize that we've got a winning understanding here, a winning conversation. We just have to get past this last contract hurdle. I think we're there. I think we understand it now to the point where we've written the right patches for it, but it's going to take a little bit of time while we wait for our lead dev to get back, do a full code review, do a log review, and then finally call it good. So I would say that if you're looking to start seeing when the data is going to stabilize and start going up again cleanly, you're probably looking right about the middle of August. And then from there to the end of the year, I think it's Katie bar the door. I think you guys are going to be pretty pleased that you're here now, that you are the chosen few early adopters, and that by the time we get to next year and we start onboarding 10, 15, 20,000 new providers, that you will be the old timers saying, hell, I already ROI'd my gear. So that's where we're at. If you have more questions on it, I mean, I'm obviously going to continue to post in the threads and the channels and so forth. But at the end of the day, we had an issue with our contractor. We believe we've solved most of it. We believe that we've hardened it to the way that it'll work perfectly for the application we're doing. And we think that we're going to be ready to call this a formalized launch in the next couple of weeks. Fingers crossed, that should be the last thing, right? I mean, we do have some stuff with telemetry, Grafana that we're always going to have to fuck with, but at the end of the day, this should be the last hurdle. This should be the one right before the finish line. So keep an eye on it. If anything changes, we'll come back to you on it. I'll open it up for questions now. Come to the stage.
I got a few questions. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah. I guess I'll stick to two, but I'm noticing on the website it doesn't seem like it's got like a good landing page. There's no like contact sales or anything like that on there. I thought that was kind of interesting. And then the other questions I had was is there anything maybe related to data storage, but other types of services like maybe data store, like databases, things like that might offer a little bit more use cases for the product?
Yeah, so most of this was answered last week, but what is going on right now? We actually have 3 websites, right? And I don't think most people understand that, because if you come to the main website, what was the main website, SC Prime, there's no real good linkage back to the Exanet Services website, and there's no real good linkages that really explain what's going on here. And we get it. We know that. We knew that that was a thing. So what we have right now is, the first thing we did was we have a web developer that we're working with, and we set him up to set up this secondary website, which was exapro.net. And exapro.net is the site that has what you're talking about in terms of pricing, the access to the cloud storage and so forth. That's the Exanet Services website. But right now, the three websites, Examiner, Exanet Services, and SE Prime, don't really have good linkage. They don't really seem like they're even related. They don't tie together well. So that process, Henry's working with the web developer on directly to clean that up quickly. And so within the next week or two, you're going to see the websites get screwed around. First of all, SE Prime website's going to get a complete overhaul, facelift, finally get rid of, Faust's junky bullshit web design capabilities and get some real quality work in there. And we'll get the things connected up so that you can see that. The case study stuff, the stuff that talks about other services, data lakes, databases, anything beyond object-based storage, talking to other S3 type applications, environment, those are all going to be fleshed out over time. Those are the case studies. Those are the compatibility studies, the white papers, the video things that Henry's working on. But we have a body now. We have a guy who's actually tasked with doing all of that specific work. So, this was a big knock on us for a long time. A couple of guys have actually seemingly left the Discord because we didn't have a satisfactory answer. They wanted this website to be all fleshed out, a year ago, and it wasn't the right time. Now's the right time, and Henry's, cranking on it. He's busting his behind right now to get as much of this data and information together. So I would just say this: hold on for about a week to 2 weeks, and then come back and revisit the websites, and you'll start to see exactly what you're looking for. What's the second question? Oh, that was 2 questions. Do you have a third?
No, he answered both of them. Yeah, the use cases and then the landing page.
Cool. Thanks. That's it? No more questions from you all. Wow. That's weak. Weak sauce. There's 101 of you here, right? I'm just gonna randomly grab somebody from the audience and pull them up on stage. How does that work? No, that probably wouldn't work very well. Probably quit the Discord and go start providing on storage if I did that. So, all right, well, it's cool. We bypassed our hour anyway. So if there are no more questions, appreciate everybody tuning in this week again. It's a tough week. I mean, there's just no other way to say it. When you see those data charts drop the way they do, it doesn't taste good. And it feels like we shouldn't really be there this far down the line. But look, it is where we are. It is a thing. We are working through it. We believe we have it solved. But you got to just stick with us and hang through this. Some skeptics would say, yeah, you keep saying this bullshit week after week after week and you never get anywhere. But that's not true. Every week we're getting further and further up the road, and you can see that progress. The relayer, for instance, didn't work for the longest time. Then it did work. It was broke a little bit, but then it now works very good. Pretty soon the relayer is going to be super lead pipe simple to stand up. So we continue to make the progress that we say we're going to make, and it's no different with this contractor. Stick around, and within a very short period of time, you're going to start to see your data go up and stick around and pay you money and be good. The last thing I do want to say is this, and this actually may turn out to be a little controversial, so I just better just kind of just say it. I did agree, and I think we did it naturally to say, well, look, with the way this thing's drug out this year, it makes sense to go ahead and pause the degradation of the incentives formula going back down to being focused on price. Plus, the coin price dropped significantly, so it was coming closer to where it needed to be anyway. So we put a freeze on it. But I want to make sure everybody understands that formula is going to get turned into a floating price. It shouldn't be on a scale at all. It needs to get to the price where it's supposed to be. And once it gets there, then it gets turned into a automatic pricing structure that changes with the price of the coin as the price of the coin changes. So yes, I've agreed to freeze it. We've frozen it so far for 1 month. We'll probably freeze it at least for the next 2 to 3 months. But you need to understand that sometime between now and January 1st, it's probably going to get changed again. And when it gets changed, it will go into a floating mechanism that will float alongside coin price. And unfortunately, it's still really, really high right now. So if like all of a sudden we onboarded 800 petabytes and the coin price like, quadrupled